Hello! This is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you happen to be watching on, and they should show up here in my chat room. And we can talk directly. I hope you've had a good week. Today is our weekly roundup program. And I've got a couple of things, but most of the news this week has centered around the Democratic Party convention, which is a far more partisan subject than I care to comment upon. Um, and so I'm not really going to look at that. And looking around for other stories, I'm not finding a great deal that's made its way into the news this week. But one of the things that did is the discovery of a 2,492 carat diamond in Botswana. And this is the largest diamond found in 119 years, and the second largest diamond ever dug out of a mine after the Cullinan diamond that was discovered in South Africa in 1905. And it's described as being the size of a fist. And it certainly appears to be. And it's interesting when you look at it in the photos. In the photos, at least, it kind of looks like a random piece of glass. Um, but of course, it's in its natural state. It's not been cut or polished or any of those things. And it's interesting to see how different it looks in that state. And hello to Zane in the chat room. It's good to see you. And it's an interesting story, and diamonds are an interesting subject. So I thought I'd talk about them for a moment because, as you can see, I like diamonds. My family has tended to like diamonds. One reason is that metaphysically speaking, because they're such a hard stone, they are symbolic of steadfastness and stability and focus. And they're very beneficial in that sense for those energies. They're also very highly priced and not nearly worth what they sell for. On average, if you buy a diamond from a jewelry shop, it's worth about 10% of what you're likely to pay for it. And hello to Renee in the chat room. It's good to see you, Renee. And so my advice is don't be looking for them in jewelry shops. It's not the good place to get them. You're much better to either buy them privately, get them from pawn shops, or what have you. Because although you're still not going to be paying only what they're worth, you'll be paying a lot closer to it. Because they're generally worth about 10 cents on the dollar that a jewelry store would be charging for them. Now, there are exceptions to that, and if your diamond is large enough to have its own name, if we're talking about the Krupp diamond or the Taylor Burton diamond or what have you, that will probably be worth more like what it's being charged at. If it's that large, then it really is rare and really is an expensive piece, but your average jewelry diamonds really are not. The price has been artificially created and controlled. And that's something important to remember. The other interesting thing that I like to remark upon when discussing diamonds is how much they've changed historically in how they look now versus how they once looked. And that's due to the advancements in how stones are cut. And it's not only true for diamonds, it's true for many stones. We have developed over the centuries increasingly brilliant ways to cut stones that really emphasize their the reflection of light. And if you look at diamonds from before those changes happened, they're a very different looking stone, which was still considered precious, but did not have the kind of fire that you would expect to see in a modern diamond. And in fact, they sometimes, particularly in different light, could look quite dark. And if you look at Renaissance paintings, you'll often see lots of little black stones in the jewelry that they're wearing. And um, a good art historian can confirm for you that these are meant to be diamonds. The reason that they're shown that way is that at the time they did look much darker than they look now, but also they didn't quite understand how to paint the reflective quality of that stone as well as they later would. Some of the paintings from the Renaissance make pretty clear what you're looking at. Others might be a piece of jet. But we often have descriptions of this jewelry that specify what stones were in it, and it was not jet. In some cases, we even have the jewelry. And over the next 200 years, you can see art develop in such a way, and also stone cutting develop in such a way that the diamonds start to look like what we expect diamonds to look like. And Zane says, do you feel any vibrations from the diamond? And do you mean the one that's in the news? Let me look at that. So what I feel from looking at the photo, I definitely feel all the things you'd expect from a diamond. I feel the stability. I feel the strength of being, but it also feels kind of harsh to me. And diamonds can be. And one of the things that oh, and she means when I wear the diamond, when I wear diamonds as jewelry, yes, absolutely. Just as any other stone. And, it's largely stability and focus. And I had one diamond ring once, and I was warned um, by Lady Crystal, speaking psychically, that it would have these qualities of focus and stability, but it would also be a very rough stone. It would force perfection. And I did not, in the end, keep that ring. That it would have very much a polishing effect on me and my life, but it wouldn't necessarily be a fun polishing. Diamonds can have that too. They can be a harsh stone. Some people don't like them because they think they even look harsh. And I think that with diamonds or any stone, your reaction to that stone is a combination of its qualities and yours. Um, and if you have a bad reaction to a stone, it may be because the things that that stone draws are things you don't want. And hello to Black Crystal in the chat room. And let me see if I have a good example handy. No, I don't know if I do. Well, how about this? This is one of my favorite rings. It's Tibetan, and it is set with turquoise and lapis lazuli. And both of these stones can be connected to psychic development, spiritual connection, um, and turquoise in particular to communication. Um, if you are someone who's afraid of psychic things, these are probably not the stones you want to be wearing. You probably would not like them very much. Or you might not have a good feeling from them because these are the energies they will pull around you by and large. Now, I've said before, and if you really want to learn about stones and crystals, you can pre-order my upcoming book, Reverend Don's Book of Stones, Metals, and Crystals from CorellianPublishing.com. And it talks about all of this in great depth. But every stone has its natural thing to be. Um, I was just saying, for example, that the turquoise and lapis lazuli both have to do with communication, with psychic development, with bringing through spiritual messages. And they both have that connotation, among others. But the way in which that will express itself through an individual stone may vary. Um, and this is one of the interesting things about natural stones. You could easily come up with a piece of lapis lazuli which focuses only on drawing certain kinds of psychic activity, or may focus on something completely different just because of its individual development. You have to be able to have a sense for it to really tell what it will be good with. And a piece of natural lapis lazuli or any other stone may be good for the things you expect it to be good for, or it may be good for something else because it had some unusual development in its history. And if it's a piece of jewelry of any age, it may also be how some other metaphysical person may have used it in the past that may have changed its basic vibration as well. These are things to consider. The other thing that I like to point out to people when we're talking about stones is that if you're talking about a laboratory grown stone versus a natural stone, it's going to be a lot closer to those stereotypical properties and a lot less likely to divulge from them or diverge from them. A natural stone may have had any number of other things influencing it over its thousands of years of existence. A laboratory grown stone, which is just as useful metaphysically, but will be more stereotypical because it's much younger and did not have extraneous things involved in its development. Um, and so, depending on what it is you're wanting to do, having a quote created stone maybe more to your need. It all depends. These are things to consider. One of my family's best pieces was a ruby ring about the size of my small fingernail. Currently belongs to Lady Crystal. Had belonged to my mother and my grandmother and Caroline Highcorrell. Very old piece, and also a laboratory created ruby because they go back that far. Beautiful piece, strong energy, and definitely exactly what you'd expect a ruby to do. Um, a natural ruby of the same size would be ruinously expensive and also might be more idiosyncratic. When you work with stones, these are some of the things to consider. They're not always exactly what you expect them to be. And it's one of the things we'll be talking about in that book. We'll also be talking about how the shape of the stone can affect um, how you might use it. And let's go back for a moment to this ring. And I don't know if you can adequately see it, but I think you can. And the lapis lazulis are all in spherical form or circular form. Um, whereas the turquoise has been set in triangular forms. None of them are singular. They're all little pieces of turquoise that have been mosaically set in triangles. But energetically, what does this mean? Well, it means that the lapis lazuli, which is connected to the third eye, to psychic messaging, to spiritual connection, in this case, being set in these round forms, is set to amplify and expand. That's what circles do. The turquoise, on the other hand, having been set as triangles, is there um, to transform and transmute, to change as well as to develop. And because of the particular qualities of turquoise, to change the vibrations around the wearer to more easy communication and connection to spirit and psychic abilities. But that's an example of how the shape of stones will affect things. If you look at my rings that I'm wearing, all of the stones are round. They're all meant to amplify. And again, they all deal with stability and focus. So they're meant to amplify those traits. And the other thing about diamonds that might be interesting for people to hear at this moment. They have a traditional, quote, traditional for the last 100 years, association with weddings. And that issue of stability was part of the reason. The idea that the diamond would help to make love more long lasting, more stable, more enduring. And that's how they came to be associated, um, at least metaphysically, with engagement and wedding rings. Now, of course, the other way was that they were quite expensive and sought after at that time, and they had a good marketing campaign. But metaphysically, these were the reasons. And interestingly, we seem to be experiencing another change with that. I saw an interesting comment yesterday, um, about, I think it was an Instagram influencer assuring her viewers that yes, there really were gold wedding rings too. I guess it's become common for people to have either silver or white gold wedding rings, to the point that some younger people, at least in this person's viewership, wondered if there had ever been golden wedding rings. Whereas, certainly down to when I was young, that was the rule, going back a very long way. I'm a little surprised by that, but it speaks to how we change. So, on one hand, I'm surprised to see that change having happened. On the other hand, I'm not really. And I often talk about change. I'm going to take a moment to talk about it here. And this is also a little bit of what we've been talking about with diplomacy all week. Um, Ability to change is part of that. If you want to be a good diplomat, if you want to be a good leader, you have to be willing to change when it's necessary because it will be. Um, and this is a good example. In discovering that the younger generation seems to prefer silver toned wedding rings, a person of my generation could either say, oh no, they must be gold, or, oh, that's an interesting change. And I definitely come under the second point of view. And there were always both silver and gold wedding rings available and used. And my parents had both at different points in their lifetime. It all depended on the person. And I'm sure it still does. And I'm sure there are plenty of gold wedding rings running around. But it's interesting to see the majority custom change. Um, and equally interesting to notice that they don't realize it was a change. That's the other very dangerous thing we all need to remember. And that is that we have a tendency not to remember when we've made a change and think it was always that way. And um, this can be very deceiving to people. It's self-deception, but still. And one of the big places um, that people deceive themselves in terms of change, which is not exactly the point that I was about to make, but it's relevant, is that they want to remember the good old days and how things always were until those nasty young people changed everything. And it's almost always untrue. If you go back and look at news sources from previous years, you will almost always find that the things that some people will try to tell you were not there were everywhere. There are people out there who'll try to tell you there were no working women before the 60s. History's full of them. It is true that women didn't always have as many choices for work before the 60s, although that's not as universal as it sounds either. But generally speaking, they were in less desirable forms of work, but they were all over the place. Anyone who tries to tell you that if you go back to the age of Downton Abbey, for example, that every woman was a housewife staying home while her husband was out, just ask them who all those maids are. Who are all those women working in the kitchen? Who are all those ladies' maids? They were working women. At that same time, there were women working in all kinds of professions, but usually very specific ones. You didn't tend to see them in the higher ranking, better paid professions very often. That did change. But if you go back a little farther in history, you'll find there were a lot more women in those positions than you expected too. There is a lot of effort to disguise the past into something it was not. People will tell you there were not many divorces before the 1960s, but if you go back and look, there were plenty of them. My grandmother was divorced. My great grandmother was divorced. Um, my great aunt was divorced, and they were certainly not alone. Go back and look in old newspapers from 100 years ago. You'll find notices of divorce. It absolutely did happen. Now, it didn't happen in certain countries, but what you'll find is people simply abandoning their family in that case. Um, and a de facto divorce still frequently happened. Also, you'll find annulments, which are effectively divorces. And so, this idea that there's really anything new under the sun is um, really just not so. And if you look at history, you'll find a lot more similarity to the present if you don't listen to other people's take on it, but actually look at what's there. One of the things you often hear about history is they were terribly dirty because they didn't bathe. And this is totally untrue and true at the same time. For the most part, people in history didn't bathe very often because bathing is to immerse yourself in water. And they did not, outside of the high nobility, have very good ways to heat large amounts of water. So if they were going to do that, it was going to be mostly cold or lukewarm water. So they didn't do it too often. That doesn't mean they didn't wash regularly. And they did. You find this referred to many times, some peoples more than others, some circumstances more than others, but it was not the way it's sometimes represented. But people have this idea and this interest of making the past look bad in order to help people feel better about injustices in the present. Well, at least we've come forward from that. And while that's true in some things, it's deceptive in others. And it certainly is never a reason not to look at the things that are not good now and try to change them. So, I mean, these are some of the things that go through my mind. Um, it's very interesting to look at how people have lived historically. There's an old saying that travel is fatal to prejudice. Um, that if you travel and you meet different people in different places and see how they live, what you're going to find is that people are people everywhere. Um, Now, I wish that were entirely true, that was always fatal to prejudice, but there are plenty of people who have traveled and remained bigoted and prejudiced in their points of view. But if you have open eyes, you'll see that everybody is a person. Um, People you don't like are still really people. They have their own motivations. And I'm a believer in the idea that everybody does the best they can. Not necessarily the best thing that could have been possible in an ideal circumstance, but the best thing they could see as possible. I'm also a great believer in the idea that, with a few exceptions, people are never villains in their own story. Everybody, I think, is a villain in somebody's story, but rarely their own. No matter how bad they might seem, they usually think they're doing the right thing. Now, there are some exceptions to that. I think I would mostly think of those as mental illness. But even people who did horrible things often felt that they were doing good things. And hello to two neurons in the chat room who says, "Good afternoon, Uncle and Lord Don," which I believe tells me who two neurons is. Um, and welcome to you. But this brings us back to one of my favorite subjects, and we have only 5 minutes left. So, of course, I'm going to open the large subject. But, what is good and what is bad? And the answer is it depends where you are and what your background is. Many of the things that we today would say are absolutely virtue, 1 or 200 years ago, the people would have said were absolutely vice. Gender equality, most of us today would say this is absolutely appropriate. Um, a couple of 100 years ago, people argued vehemently against anything approaching it and thought it was a bad idea. Um, and hello to Vivian in the chat room. And Vivian um, has just said that I've heard that all stones need to have a breath, and that's why there's always a hole underneath your ring, or the set in which your stone is. Um, that's a very interesting point. I'd have to say that I have not personally heard that, but it is true that that's often the case, but not always. So, for example, if we look at this Labradorite that I often wear, you'll notice that it does have a hollow setting. So, I guess we can say it can breathe. But if we go back and look at the lapis and um, turquoise ring, it does not. It's solid silver on the back. Um, so I would say I'm not entirely surprised that such a belief exists, but it's not universal, which is often the case with beliefs. There's also a belief, I believe, on the part of some followers of Edgar Cayce, that if you're going to use a stone psychically, you should encase it in glass because they believe that the emanations of the stone are too powerful to expose yourself to otherwise. Obviously, not a point of view I agree with. Although I would agree with the idea that Cayce and his work are rather fascinating, um, but I clearly don't do any such thing with stones I work with. But for some people, it's a necessity. And, are they right or wrong? They're different. And I don't know. The only thing that I can say in terms to the whole comment is I don't notice any difference between the rings that do have an opening and the rings that don't, or the other pieces of jewelry I have. And certainly, logistically speaking, the reason for that whole um, being there is to help with the reflection of light, and also because the various precious metals are expensive. But the idea of a stone needing a breath is very interesting. And I'd have to say, I had not heard that previously. So thank you, Vivian. And hello to Janet Gann in the chat room. It's good to see you. And at this point, we've kind of come to the end of our half hour. I didn't have a lot of news today, but as I said at the very beginning, partisan politics has been dominating the news this week, and I prefer not to comment directly upon that because of my position in various 501c3s. Topics, yes, but too directly upon various parties or candidates, I prefer to avoid. Um, and with that, we've come to the end of our half hour. I do have one last thing, and that is that I'm looking at putting up a compendium of the week's midday shows on Sunday afternoons, where you can find them all at once if you happen to miss them. So watch for that coming. I think that it will be an interesting addition, particularly because these days I've been doing a lot of multiple shows dealing with the same subject. And this will allow you to find the subjects all together. So thank you everyone for joining me. I will be back with Midday on Monday. And I hope that you have a wonderful weekend. And let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we thank you for this beautiful world that was here when we came in and will be here when we go out, but offers so many wonderful things for us to experience in the meantime. And we ask you to help us to always see those things as wonderful whenever possible, because we know they always are. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love and knowing you're always with us. Still, from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. May you be blessed now and always, and I will see you on Monday. I am now going to end the stream. However, I will tell you that Restream has changed its system slightly. And it used to be when you ended the stream, the little go live button would change into a leave button, and you would hit the same button to leave. That doesn't work that way now. And so if you were watching yesterday, you will see that I accidentally hit that button a second time and had 3 seconds more online. Um, but we're not going to do that today. So once I'm